welcome to our podcast. We've got a name for it this time. Welcome to Rebuild Confidence. Brett, welcome here again.
Good to be back.
Today, we've got an amazing guest. We've got Alex Harris, who is the Lead Quantity Surveyor for Construction Cost Consultants. He did the roadshow with us for Beyond the Build, and the reception he got, we thought we would get him in as a guest. So here he is.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy.
Obviously, I know a bit about you, so I'm going to ask you some intrusive questions. You didn't qualify first as a quantity surveyor when you left uni. What did you do?
No, I started life, I went in a bit of a different direction. I started life as a Roman archaeologist.
Wow.
A love of history sort of took me down that path originally.
So I know this, so tell the listeners this big thing that you found once.
Yeah, I did quite a few, sort of half a dozen pretty interesting digs in my time. The first one I did was a pretty interesting late Iron Age, early Roman farmstead. On my second day, so first day of proper digging, I found a skeleton, 2,000-year-old sort of murder victim or ritual sacrifice who'd been bashed over the back of the skull and tipped in a pit.
Wow. So how many years does it usually take? You do it second time round. Is that the most notable thing that you found?
What was funny about that is as we kept digging, we found a bunch of horse bones underneath. So originally it looked like I'd found a centaur.
Wow.
Half man, half horse. So that was funny.
Anyway, Alex, tell us a bit about what you're doing here at Construction Cost Consultants, and tell us a wee bit about your role.
Sure. Well, obviously, I did change my career from an archaeologist into a QS, probably coming about 12 years ago now. So, yeah, at CCC, I head up the sort of QS arm of the business on the cost consultancy side rather than the insurance rebuild side. So I lead the team there, dealing with sort of any developments from small mum and dad investor extensions to sort of multi-million dollar, $100 million plus developments on our commercial or residential or infrastructure projects.
Fantastic. So there's a lot of talk at the moment about construction cost escalations and things like that. Do you want to tell us what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously always plenty going on in the world that influence construction costs. Usually the wider economic and political environment plays effect. Certainly in the last couple of years, we've been seeing that have an effect coming out of the post-COVID world with sort of an environment of high inflation and high interest rates.
So what sort of level did the escalation get to during or over COVID?
Oh, I mean, escalation-wise, it really depends on what we're talking about.
So an average over construction, what would you say that we got to?
I believe it was around 10% cost escalation-wise. Yeah, if you factor in all the, some materials like steel were up 20-30% for some time. And obviously CPI, that's Consumer Price Index, which measures basically the grocery basket of your everyday cost, your groceries, your fuel, your rent, your clothes. But, price escalation is a different thing, and that's what we're sort of more focused on in our line of work. So obviously cost escalation isn't just inflation that's tracked by the government or the central bank.
But it does have an effect, a small effect on it.
Of course, yeah. Of course, we pay close attention to what the inflation data is doing. But for us, the cost escalation is the movement in things like construction materials, labour, plant. It's those things which really move the construction works, and we have to pay sort of more attention to that than what the baseline inflation's saying.
So if you're doing a construction project as a percentage basis, what percentage would you say is actual build costs?
What percentage of overall cost is to do with materials?
Yeah, of an overall build, because you've got your development costs and things like that. Because everybody sees a building's worth $100 million, and everybody thinks when they see escalation, it's on $100 million, and we know it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously varies, but depending on the type of building and what materials are involved. But generally, as a rule, it's around sort of 40% is materials and about 60% is labour.
Not of that 100 million though.
No.
So it's probably about 50% of that 100 million is construction costs. So of that 50 million, would you say that's 40, 60 sort of thing then?
Yeah. Of the build cost, it'd be about 40, 60. But then, yeah, as you said, outside of that, you've got all the other
Your
development costs.
and finance costs and things like that. Yep. So when materials escalation, it only affects that, was it
40%? Yeah.
So it sort of brings it into a bit of perspective for people that don't understand the construction industry. And the three of us do understand that, but it's people think it goes on to that 100 million and we know it doesn't. Based on the 10%, you said that sort of roughly where we were at the end of COVID. Where would you say we are sitting now?
At the moment, we're around about between 3 and 4%.
Wow, what a difference, eh?
Yeah, I mean, that's more CPI data, so much. That's more inflation data. So actually, cost escalation wise, we're actually sitting under CPI at the moment. We're closer to around 1% in terms of material and labour increases.
Would that be considered as being stable?
Yeah, that certainly seems to have stabilised, and the forecasts looking forward are they're expected to remain around that level.
And construction costs, how are they doing? They're moving upwards?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, they always tend to move upwards, don't they? They're tracking around 1% at the moment.
We do hear people saying, and we read in the media, construction costs have come down and things like that. In my 35 years in the construction industry as a QS, I have never seen construction costs come down.
Yeah, it tends to just inflate at a slightly reduced level sometimes, doesn't it? But yeah, very rarely.
So how do you manage to budget that and price that in going forward?
So generally, if the start date is a few years out, we'll always factor in what the inflation data and what the cost escalation data is doing at the time, and then that will sort of be a blanket percentage we might apply to only the construction cost element of the estimate. But then, obviously, depending on some materiality that's involved in the project, we'll look at individual items as well. For instance, I said overall materials and labour are tracking around 1% increase on the year at the moment. There's obviously outliers outside of that. There's certain things that are up 3 or 4%. There's certain things that are down 3 or 4%. So
you take into consideration, let's say you've tendered for a job that's a 3-year build or a 3-year construction period. So do you take that into consideration?
Yes, absolutely. What we often do is we'll have 2 different levels of escalation in the estimate. One will be escalation to the point that we go to contract, and then what's often practice, if it's especially a large project, is to have another escalation to midway through construction period.
Yeah.
Do you think that contractors are experienced enough to understand that that's how things should be priced, or are they pricing as cheap as they can to get the job and then coming back and realising that escalation's smashing them on the way through the job?
Generally, they don't tend to include escalation in their tenders. Obviously, our escalation is necessary because we might be doing that initial budget a year before or 6 months before they go to tender. So we need to capture the escalation in that period. But obviously, the point at which we receive those tenders back from the contractors, they don't need to have included that escalation period originally. I think the trouble with contractors is obviously they're going and getting real cost data from their supply chain. So they're telling you the price that their supply chain says, so they're probably not factoring in any escalation.
But at the moment, real competitive market, everybody's competing to get the jobs. Essentially, if they're going for the dollar value at the tender time, there's potentially going to be some issues further down the track during the construction period.
It will be, yeah. The escalation that we sort of include that then gets factored into the client's budgets sort of more acts for them as an additional level of contingency.
I'm reading a lot of QSs putting stuff on LinkedIn and things at the moment to say that the tenders are coming back way lower than they expected, and they're advising clients not to accept the tenders because they're just putting a rod for their own back further down the line. The problem is a lot of funding comes based on that, and to get funding based on your QS telling you that the price is 20 million when your tender's coming back at 16, 17 million is a big problem. And I don't know how I've not seen this before, and I don't know how we get around that.
We've just had a good example of this on one of our most recent tenders where our estimate was around 2.2 million, and most of the contractors, the tender returns came in around that area, but one of them was 1.2 million. Luckily, the client sort of respects our decision and that of the project manager, where we sort of made the pretty good case that, look, this tender is just not acceptable. It's not robust enough. And while it's attractive on the price front, and you think, okay, maybe there's some risk there that we can just absorb, that it's really, you're taking too much of a risk there.
That's when you want an experienced client to understand. I mean, that makes your job so much harder to negotiate. You're negotiating up the way as well then to the client to get them to understand that this is a huge risk for them.
Yeah, it's not always, you obviously don't always want to choose the lowest tender.
Obviously, the last couple of years have been really tough in the construction industry, and we know that from pricing and from the escalation costs that you're talking about. And we know that there's a lot of labour that we're losing to overseas, Australia mainly. But recently we've seen some real interesting changes in that with work coming in. So there's a couple of huge or large contracts for us that have come in the door.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we've got a couple of large residential developments, so resi and hotel, that have been on the shelf for a while, that have both sort of come back into design this year. Hopefully that's a sign of other things to come.
So with the interest rates coming down, these guys are getting their commercial rates a bit better buy-in for them, which brings the jobs into more viable options for them to start on site. Whereas when they went through the roof, they just weren't working. And the developers not taking that risk, and I totally understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense with the cost of money being so high with those interest rates, coupled with construction costs that were high, really did make those margins pretty tight. And we've been in a bit of a stalemate where, for buyers, we really need those prices to soften to bring them back to the table. But on the flip side, the developers really need the prices to harden again. And then it's a bit of a stalemate there.
If Brett was a developer and he comes to you with a development and said, I don't know whether I'm doing it at the moment, what do you think? I can get the money for this. I'm talking more for construction cost wise. Is it a cheaper time to build it than now?
Certainly, yeah. As obviously we are in a sort of stable environment construction cost wise, and with the market being slow, material and labour wise, probably the best it's going to be. Because if we do see an uptick and suddenly those supply chains get stretched, material prices and labour prices are going to increase as the workflow increases.
When do you, I'm asking you to look at your crystal ball here. I visually and from my past experience, I can see a huge hit coming in the construction industry, a real boost in it. I'll tell you after you tell. I'll show you mine after you show me yours. When do you think?
I think, last year in 2024, everyone was saying survive till 25. We're sort of over halfway through 25 now, and a lot of people are still surviving.
Just.
Yeah. So thrive in 25, I think, is probably out the window. But the general feel is that certainly the latter part of this year and into 2026, we definitely expect things to be picking up.
Yeah, what Alex said. But the other thing is, and it might seem a little bit minor, is we're heading into summer as well, and people feel a lot better about projects and getting out and about and spending money. So the economy, even though it's pretty flat, the money is getting cheaper to get as well. So I completely agree with you for a lot of reasons.
I think next year, mid next year, maybe late next year is we're going to actually be in a boom, because we're actually starting to see some of these big $150 million, $200 million jobs coming through the door.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Yeah, I mean, the government's doing a lot of, and the public sector, there's a lot of stuff going on in the sort of infrastructure and civil space at the moment. They're really driving that.
We are stabilising as a country financially, which is good, but we just need them to spend money, and that's been the big problem with the construction industry over the last couple of years. I think that we haven't had any money spent.
Yeah, and they sort of scrapped a lot of what was going on with the last government, didn't they, when they came in?
Hopefully, fingers crossed that we're on the right route, and we're right. Hopefully there is a boom next year.
We're here for it, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on, Alex. We really appreciate it. when we did the Beyond the Build, we put you out your comfort zone and put you on stage in front of hundreds of people, and that's not your thing, and this probably isn't either. So I really appreciate you putting your big boy pants on and coming in and chatting to us.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, as I said, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.